What's up everybody, this is Meher, and in today's video we are going to talk about values and expressions. So before I go ahead and tell you that all functions in JavaScript are values, let's take a fun exercise and try to understand what exactly are values. And also, let's understand what are expressions. So let me begin by saying that all values are expression. And what I mean by that is, let's say we take a completely unrelated example from JavaScript, and let's say you take a pizza to a master chef and you tell him that you want one of these. And master chef is going to look at the pizza. He has already probably figured it out. He's going to get back into the kitchen and he's going to come back with a freshly baked, exactly the same pizza which you showed to him earlier. So in this case, the pizza is an expression and as well as a value. It's an expression because you can use it to place an order, or you can use it to express your intent, and it is a value because you get it back from the master chef. So if we apply the same example to JavaScript, and let's say we take the most simplest one, and let's say you take a number 23 and you give it to JavaScript, JavaScript is going to give you back 23. So that's an easy way to say whether 23 is a value or an expression. In this case, 23 is both a value and an expression in its simplest form. So now that we have figured out all values are expressions, let's ask ourselves, are there any different kind of expressions as well? So let's go back to the same example about the pizza and let's extend it. Let's say instead of now taking a pizza to the master chef, what you do instead is you take all the separate ingredients. Let's say you take the pizza dough, you take the cheese, you take the tomato, and you hand it over to the master chef. And master chef in no time goes back into the kitchen, gets you a freshly baked pizza again. So pizza dough plus tomato plus cheese plus bell peppers is an expression, but not a value. But the pizza dough itself is a value and an expression. The tomato is a value and an expression. So individually, all the ingredients are both value and expression, just like the way pizza was in the previous example. In this example, the ingredients are both values and expression. But if you put them together, unless it has been processed and baked, it's still not a pizza. So now if we come back to JavaScript, and instead of giving a simple number like 23, we give JavaScript something like 23 plus 100. So now these three entities, which is number 23, the plus operator, and the number 100, when they are combined together, they become an expression. Although the number 23 is a value and expression, the number 100 is a value and expression. But because of that operator, which indicates that some operation needs to be done on it, it becomes an expression. And when you give that to JavaScript, JavaScript gives you back the number 1, 2, 3, which is both value and an expression. So we see that numbers are values, and you can use numbers and put some operators in between them to make expressions. So the bottom line is all values are expressions, but not all expressions are values. So now let's go to the second part where we look at the values and identities. So in JavaScript, we use the triple equal to operator in order to test if two values are identical or not. So how exactly does triple equal to work? And let's say I extend that same example and now I show you two boxes of pizza. Can you say that both the boxes are identical? And there are actually four possibilities here. So the first possibility is that out of both the boxes, one of the box is a square box and another one is a slice box. And although they both contain the same pizza, because their containers are different, they are definitely not identical. And it applies to JavaScript in the sense of types. For example, the string 2 and the number 2, they both are definitely not same, although they contain a value which is same to us in some sense, but they are completely different because of the container. And the same is true with Boolean as well. For example, true is definitely not equal to string true. So now the second possibility is that you have exactly identical pizza boxes, which is the regular size square boxes. But this time you have different pizza inside them. And what that means in JavaScript is that let's take two numbers, which is 2 and 3. They have the same type or the same container, which is the number, but they are not identical this time because the value itself is different. And the same could be true with strings. For example, you can take string B and string 2. They both are of same container type or the same type, but the values are different, and that's why they are not identical. And same with Boolean. You can take true is definitely not equal to false, although they are of the same type. So now let's talk about the third possibility, and let's extend the same example of pizza. Let's say now this time you have exactly identical boxes and you also have exactly identical pizza inside them. So how do we distinguish now whether one is different from the other? So this is absolutely a case with strings, numbers, and booleans we have seen so far. So let's say we take an expression which is as simple as 2 plus 3, and we take another value which is, let's say, number 5, and we give this expression and a value to JavaScript, and we ask JavaScript, are they identical? JavaScript is going to come back to you and it's going to tell you that yes, they exactly are identical. So for JavaScript, even the evaluation of an expression that leads up to a value is identical to a value which is of the same type and has the same contents in it. So we can extend the same example, and instead of giving an expression and a value to JavaScript, what we can also do is we can give two expressions to JavaScript, and we can let JavaScript evaluate the expressions and figure it out for us whether they are identical or not. So in JavaScript, strings, numbers, and booleans, they are called as value and sometimes even called as primitive types. And in this video series, probably unintentionally, I also might use them interchangeably. So now let's talk about the fourth possibility, and let's stretch that same metaphor about the pizzas. And let's say some type of pizza boxes have some sort of barcode on them, and probably it contains information about what time it was baked and probably who baked it. And now, although the containers are exactly identical, which is the regular sized pizza boxes, and also the pizzas are exactly identical, still there is a way now to distinguish them. And this is what something which relates to JavaScript as reference types. So now in JavaScript, we might ask that what if something has exactly the same type, it has the same content, but still it is not considered identical. And a very common example of that would be an array as your data structure. So now let's say if I take two arrays, and the first array contains two expressions in its 0th index and the first index, and probably it has value like 1 plus 1, and the other expression in the first array is probably something like 1 plus 2. So now our second array contains two values, which is probably 2 and 3. So at this moment, this looks like these two arrays are absolutely identical. But if you give these two arrays to JavaScript and you ask JavaScript whether these are identical or not, JavaScript is going to tell you that they are absolutely not identical. So when you create an array with some values in it and you create variations of that array using some expression, every time JavaScript evaluates your array, it creates a new unique array, which is definitely not identical to any of its variation arrays. So it's as if JavaScript is generating new arrays with some kind of an identifier so that it is able to distinguish between each of the array which you create. So this fourth possibility, which is of reference type, is not only interesting, but it is absolutely important, because what we have seen with arrays so far, it also applies to objects and even functions, which is going to be the topic of our next video. So in JavaScript, all functions are values, but they are much more than even your simple string, number, and boolean types, and even much more complex than data structures like maps or arrays. So we are going to cover functions in much more detail in our next video. And for this video, hope it was helpful. Leave me your feedback and let me know in the comment section what you feel about it. And yes, as usual, please like and subscribe.